One of my favorite things in all of comic books right now is watching people who have ardently defended the comic book industry being like, no, there's nothing wrong with Marvel and DC, actually having to admit that perhaps the skeptics were right all along, and there is something absolutely wrong with Marvel and DC and mainstream US comic books, which really aren't mainstream anymore. Manga's mainstream, Dogman's mainstream, Batman, not so much. From the author that brought you, it's raining money in comic books. Just 2 months ago comes superhero comics are in a creative rut. Who, if anyone, will fly to the rescue? Rob Sakowitz himself says this to open up the article. After a few fat years during the pandemic, it sure looks like periodical comics are deep into a cyclical downturn, both financially and creatively. Though hard numbers can be tough to figure, reports are that sales are flat or down dating back to as far as September, outside of the usual manga and kid-oriented material. Whatever graphic novels, webtoons, and media adaptations are doing to expand the top of the market funnel, the perennial market leaders aren't doing much to keep those readers in the pipeline with monthly must-reads. Recent data shows superheroes are about to lose their place as the top-selling category in US comics and graphic novels, something that, frankly, might end up being good for the medium, but is going to hurt the direct market that depends on reliable, repeat customers for monthly periodicals. Who's been reporting on all this for 5 years now, speaking the gospel truth each and every week right here on YouTube? I've been doing it. Perch has been doing it. Your boy Zach has been doing it for like 10 years now. Doug Ernst has been doing it for 8 years. Anglintine's been doing it. We've been all pointing out the facts that we're slapping all these people directly in the face, yet they just wanted to keep ignoring all the problems and acting like, well, if we just never acknowledge it, it'll go away, right? Comic books are more popular now than they ever been. More people in America are reading comic books today than have ever read comic books in their life. They're just not reading DC comics. They're not reading Marvel comics. They're reading manga because they've been relegated to the back burner as far as American pop culture and the comic book scene itself. They run off so many readers that even the biggest of shills, the most ardent supporters of the downfall of the American comic book industry, are having to acknowledge things aren't going so well. Mr. Sakowitz goes over some of the things that he believes might be hurting the creative process, what he calls the creative rut in comic books. I agree with some of this, and I think some of it he has completely wrong. First up, supply and demand mismatch. If there are too many books chasing not enough readers, the result is a market shutdown. 2022 saw a 7% increase in the number of monthly titles published by the major publishers, according to Comicron. Do readers have the same money and attention to devote to the hobby as they had when everyone was stuck inside doing Zoom meetings? A related problem on the demand side is money. Lots and lots of mostly young, mostly guys that were pulling down big bucks from tech jobs are now out of work as a result of the more than 200,000 layoffs in the past several months. These aren't the only people reading comics, but there's a pretty strong demographic correlation between this segment and the most avid readers of superhero and genre periodicals. I do not believe that the most avid readers of superhero and genre periodicals are young men in between the ages of like 22 and 30. The people that are reading periodicals are like in between the ages of 30 and 45 for the most part, and for the most part are pretty stable in their lives. I know everybody would like to blame all this stuff on the pandemic. You would like to blame all this stuff on the economic downturn that is absolutely happening. And yes, anytime you go into a recession or worse, it is going to affect basically everything when it comes to finances. But this isn't happening because young guys all of a sudden don't have that tech money anymore. This is happening because Marvel and DC drove almost all their readers away. They tried so hard to court a new, better audience that they actually drove off the audience that they actually had that was willing to come into the comic book shop every single week, who for the most part, if you're a comic book shop, you can't keep your doors open by selling comic books anymore. You've got to go and expand your horizons. You've got to be a game shop. You've got to sell tchotchkes like Funko Pops. You've got to do everything in the world but actually sell comic books to keep the doors open right now. Because he is right. There is no demand for all these comic books that Marvel and DC are putting out right now. And DC and Marvel Comics have no one to blame but themselves. We've been telling them everything they've been failing on for about 5 to 10 years now, and they never listen. Next, he talks about a stale creative process. Not to disparage the hardworking men and women who make our comic books month in and month out, But the sparkle of imagination that was at work at various points of the past 10 to 12 years seems fainter these days. Some of the top talent that propelled DC Comics and Marvel Comics in the teens have moved on to create their own titles, digital-first books, or opportunities elsewhere in the entertainment industry, and their replacements have not quite hit their stride. Marvel and especially DC have tightened their belts considerably on the editorial side, shedding higher-priced veteran talent with decades of market savvy and experience in favor of younger, cheaper hands to move the books through the production line. And with those decades of experience that walked out the door, whether it be creatively or editorially speaking from DC and Marvel Comics, has come in a new generation of writers and editors who could give zero flying fucks about comic books themselves. They don't care about Superman. They don't care about Batman. They don't care about Spider-Man. They sure as hell don't care about X-Men. They don't care about any of that. They care about the platform. They want the platform to push their own personal agendas and their messages out there. They think comic books are a good place to start inserting their social messages. Unfortunately, DC Comics and Marvel Comics pretty much misread their entire reading audience, and they said, you know what? I would rather do anything in this fucking world, including watch paint dry, than read this garbage, and they walked away. And guess what? That new, younger demographic that they've been courting never came in because the stories themselves suck. DC and Marvel forgot when you go out there and hire new writers, they actually have to know how to write. When you hire somebody to write, I don't know, Superman, John Kent Superman, maybe we should hire somebody that likes John Kent Superman. Maybe we should hire somebody that actually likes comic books and would like to expand the readership rather than shove every fucking social commentary message from his stupid Melbourne existence into the fucking comic book, which turned everybody away. And this has been happening time and time and time again. That's why they have to constantly reboot everything. But they don't even change the writers anymore. They never removed Ta-Nehisi Coates when his Black Panther failed. Let's just relaunch Black Panther with Ta-Nehisi Coates again. Even writers who at one point seemed like they were pretty good in the industry, that they were going to have a really strong future. I'm talking about you, Chip Zdarsky, and your Daredevil run right now, have gone out of their way to alienate people and give everyone a reason to walk away from the comic books themselves. That's how we got here. Yes, it's a stale creative process because they forgot to go out there and actually hire comic book writers. They went out and hired activists. They gave them the characters and the platform to these activists. And shockingly, they went out there and took it and used it for their own devices to go out there and push their own agenda, which did not line up with the readers, or even if it did, the quality was so bad they couldn't stick around. He also talks about the media saturation. You might think that superheroes' decades-long domination at the box office, television, and now streaming could only help the sales of the medium of origin. And sometimes it does, as when publishers coordinate the releases of archival material with new seasons of hit shows or movies. Why should those people go to comic stores to read up on this stuff when the shows are really good, very time-consuming, and come out seemingly as often as the comic books? It's not that we hired activists. It's not that the stories are so bad. There's just so much Marvel out there. Like, why would you read the comic books? There's so much Batman content out there. Why would anybody want to read a DC comic? There's so much anime out there, and now live action adaptations of manga. It's not even funny. And all it does is drive interest in the manga itself. It's a proven actual winner, something that helps out comic book sales from Japan. Why doesn't it work here? Because the current versions of the characters suck ass. Media saturation. Sure, eventually, you're going to have so much that you can't consume it all. But you should still want to consume some of it. You shouldn't be running for the hills because there's 2 Batman movies in a 2-year period. And there's a streaming TV show related to Batman. I can't read Batman comics anymore. That's not how it works. If the comic book characters and stories were of the quality of the TV shows and the movies and all that stuff, there would actually be some synergy between the line. And when people come from movies and go to their comic book shop and say, you know what? I just discovered Iron Man. I kind of like that character. Maybe I should go read a comic book. They aren't turned away absolutely immediately when they look at the cover and Iron Man's not there. Ironheart is, because we got to replace all these characters. And then if they actually crack the book open, which they shouldn't, they realize just how bad comic books are. Comic books have been amazing for 80 years, but the past 10 years of comics at Marvel especially, and certainly at DC right now, are so atrocious. Anybody that ever came in for a sample taste test and that was their first try, would walk away immediately as long as they weren't absolutely insane. Media saturation could be a problem, but it's sure as hell working for manga. Explain that one to me. Of course, he ends it on a somewhat positive note. Or is it just another passing squall? Despite all the structural reasons why superhero comics might be in big trouble, anyone who has been a fan for longer than a decade knows this is how the business works. There are booms and busts, explosions, implosions, infinite crises, and rebirths. In the pit of a trough, Sandman could wake the industry from a creative slumber. The Walking Dead could come shambling out of nowhere, or Saga could lift sails to the stars. It is possible that some miraculous power will sweep from the sky to rescue superhero and related periodicals from their current rut. It would, however, be more reassuring if we could just see a little bit of evidence or investment from mere mortals to show that DC and Marvel are taking the problem seriously. I understand there are absolutely peaks and valleys over the history of the comic book industry, and a lot of people would like to say, well, you know what? It's just like the 90s, right? You had the 90s boom, you had the bust and all that stuff happen. You know what? Comic books pretty much survived, maybe not quite as big as they were before. This is not the 90s. That was a much needed market correction. This is a market that is absolutely dying right now. It's not that so many people decided to open up comic book shops because they decided it would be an easy way to make money. Everyone left that's actually selling comic books right now love comic books. They're in it because they love the medium, because there's no money to be made in selling periodical comic books anymore. I know a lot of people want to believe that this is just another downturn, and if we go on our current direction, that eventually it'll come back up. No, there's not going to be any coming out of this unless Marvel and DC acknowledge that they have fucked this up royally and actually put in measures to fix what is happening in the comic book industry. Comic books will survive. Manga is still going to be out there. Kids' graphic novels are still going to be out there. But the American comic book industry as we know it, the direct market, your local comic book shop, DC and Marvel, perhaps Image as well, they probably aren't going to be around in another 10 years going the way they are right now. Marvel and DC are putting so many people out of business because they have no idea how to hire people. They don't care about the characters. They don't care about the universes. And most of all, they could give a fuck less about their actual customers, the people that were paying their salaries. They put the American comic book industry where it is right now, and probably Marvel alone can fix it, with DC following along like they're following their big brother or something like that, because they can't do anything on their own. If they actually do anything smart, they just kill it in a year. See also DC Comics Rebirth, which would be dominating the American comic book landscape if they had stuck with that initiative, but they destroyed everything because they're a bunch of fucking idiots. Now, earlier in the video, I mentioned that Mr. Salkowitz said, it's raining money in comic books. And I took umbrage with that. In fact, I called him out on the lies and the way he was shilling for the comic book industry, despite knowing something was wrong. This was only 2 months ago. He knew it was wrong then, and he knows it's wrong now. There's also a link in the video description.